Hello and welcome back today to this focus on groups and distance education teaching. So group work, and we all know of group work, these are projects in which students work together to collaborate on something. It could be an art project, it could be a report, a final project for a class. Group work has always been, I think, a vital way to express to students the importance of collaboration and working together. Group work, of course, can be effective in the DE distance education learning environment, just like it can in the face-to-face classroom. Yet, we do need to acknowledge some challenges that are inherent in assigning group work to students. And I really feel like these challenges will be found whether you're teaching in a distance education or a face-to-face format. So we should certainly address those from the beginning as we talk about opportunities for group work in your class. So there are two ways we'll be discussing group work today, and I'll talk about this later, but if you want something that is immediate and spontaneous, you could assign group work in Zoom, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But if you want something that's sustained and focused on collaboration and really in-depth conversation among students, developing a project, developing some sort of research agenda for a class, really Canvas is a great place to develop that sort of group work. And as we're thinking about using groups within Canvas, we know that there are a number of possibilities. So certainly we can assign group discussions or group assignments. We can allow students to have their own homepage within Canvas to create collaboration on projects that include wiki pages, Google Documents, the sharing of files, and of course discussing ideas with one another. So as we start to look at Canvas here and go through some of the possibilities, keep in mind that you'll need to tailor whatever assignments or discussions that you want to do using groups to your own class situation, to the class that you're teaching, to the types of work that you like to assign. It's very customizable like a lot of other things in Canvas, and as I'll mention, it's really extensive. So in this video, we won't be covering every aspect of groups in Canvas, but hopefully this gives you the broad overview so that you can go back over your class and figure out what to assign to your students. So let's take a brief look at how to use groups in Canvas. And so to begin this, I'll go to a previous class page, and just a note, where applicable, if student names come up here, I will blur these out in post-production to protect the anonymity of students. So the place to begin is to click on your People tab. So when you click on your People tab, you'll see everyone here, and there's the tab for the different roles of people, and this relates to if you have a peer reviewer or someone else inside your class. We don't really have teaching assistants, but something of that nature, even an instructional aid. You'll want to click on the Groups tab here. And the minute you do that, you get this information here. It says student groups are a useful way to organize students for things like group projects or papers. Every student group gets their own calendar, discussion board, and collaboration tools so they can organize themselves and work together more effectively. So what's nice about Canvas is they've thought about this from the beginning so that if you decide to use groups, everything is available for those students within the group settings. You can randomly assign students to groups of a specific size or manually create and organize the groups. Once your groups are created, you can set assignments to be a group submission assignment, which means each group will have one submission for all users of that group. So one of the things to note is once you've set up groups in your class under the People tab, then that population of the group settings will fall into other categories within Canvas. So it mimics some other settings in Canvas as well that you may be familiar with. So it's something I do globally, and then as I go on to other settings or other tabs like assignments and discussions, the opportunities to have the groups there will already be there for me if I choose to use those. And of course, I could go within discussions and also create group settings there. It's like other features in Canvas where you can do things within different areas of your Canvas shell. So to get started, I'll just create a group set, and I click on the blue button. And what I can do then is type in something like test group. And I have some options here. So if I want to do self-sign-up, this means students essentially will have the opportunity to sign up into groups. It's a little more independent, if you will, and I can always click on this and it says here what will happen. if I do this. If I do that, then as the students join groups, and I have to, of course, tell them to do this, I then have the opportunity to let them handle it on their own. I could still go in and define how many groups and then how many group members. And then Canvas will just know if it is 4 members, and if I have 2 groups that have already been populated, once I get to, if this is 4 members in each group, once I get to the 9th member, it will automatically then ask the student to go into the 3rd group. That kind of makes sense. So it's all numerical and mathematical. I could also click this if I have different sections of the class. Typically we don't do that, but it just depends on how you have your Canvas set up. If you're teaching one unique class with one section, you don't even have to worry about that. My personal recommendation, I guess I'd be concerned about self-sign-up just because I may want to control who's in each group. I just might have a way of wanting to do this. So I may not want to allow students to create groups on their own. So if I don't want that to happen, I won't click on Allow Self-Sign-Up. I still likely will want to either create these groups manually or split people into specific groups. If I want to have 5 groups of 4 students, if I have 20 students in the class, I could click on that. I could also, at the bottom, click on Leadership, automatically assign a student group leader. And this way, you will be randomly assigning someone, and sometimes with groups like in a face-to-face class, you have the challenge of students not wanting to step up to the plate and be the group leader because the fear is they're going to have a lot of responsibility to organize the groups and to really keep the group members on task. And we'll talk about that a little bit later once we move beyond Canvas when we discuss good pedagogy and groups. So let's just for now set it up this way. And this was a smaller class, so I'll choose 3 groups and I'm going to hit Save. Now you see at the top it says randomly assigning students. And if I wanted to here, I could search my groups, or and it's showing me here I have 2 students, 2 students, and 2 students. And again, this was a small class, so you're seeing that reflected. As I click on this, I will see the names of students. And what I could do is I could remove someone from a group, I could move them, and if I did that, I would just choose on the side here the group that I want to move them in. Because a student here is in group 1, I can only then move them into group 2 or 3. And that kind of makes sense. If I clicked on a student who's in group 3, I could only move them to group 2 or group 1. I also have options at that point to set that student as the leader. And once the student is set at the leader, at the top here, I blurred out the name, you'll see a little icon of a person and then the student's name. So you know immediately who the leader is for each group. I can also click and simply remove that student from that group. And then of course I only have 1 student in a group, so it doesn't make sense. I'll mention this later. When you're setting up groups in your classes, however you decide to do it, in Zoom or Canvas, if you have groups and if the membership of the group drops because a student drops a class, if you have a lack of participation of 1 or more members of a group, it's something you want to address in terms of the learning environment and also the grading in your class. Now, if I scroll to the right here, I get another set of options. I can edit the group. So I could choose the number of group members and I can rename the group. I can also delete that group if I want to start from the beginning or set up new groups. I can click on Visit Group Homepage, and this is pretty handy. This will then be the specific homepage that is allowed for any of your groups in the class. So as you can see here, I can set up and have announcements. I can have pages. I can click on the People tab. It will just list group members and teachers and TAs. Any of the group discussions will appear here. Group files. If I have conferences set up. And then if I have collaborations set up. Collaborations, I think, are another tool to think about. Primarily this is using Google Docs, but you can also do Office 365. So if this is set up in your class, it will be available to your students. So I think it's a nice opportunity to think about just which of the tools you want to use in terms of using groups and various group assignments or discussions in your class. So I'll just go back here to the main group page. And also, by the way, if you have unassigned students in your groups, you could basically just drop and drag students. And you'll get a warning if someone is already a member of a particular group. So there's a lot to work with here, and as I'll encourage you with the Canvas resources to experiment and to see what types of group work you want to set up and how you want to use the various tools that are available. So very full-featured from a standpoint of the technology in Canvas here. Now, I can also always click on the three dots here for more settings. I could message unassigned students. So if I've allowed students to join groups on their own, I could tell them, hey, you're not in a group yet, be sure to join a group. So again, I think it's an opportunity to think about if you want to give students control or if you want to have that control from the get-go in your class. I can click on randomly assigned students, I can edit the group, I can clone a set of groups, and then I can also delete a group. So again, a lot of features here in Canvas to use depending on what you want to do with groups. And as a reminder, I would set these up by clicking on the People tab in Canvas. Now, at any point after I've set up my groups, if I want to go in and set up assignments, I can click on any of those pages. So as an example, if I wanted to set up a new assignment, I would click on assignment here. And because I have groups set up, I would click on here at the bottom, this is a group assignment. And I could choose, this is very important in our discussion of the philosophy behind your grading. Are you grading the entire group? They all get the same grade, or are you grading students individually? My personal preference when I've done group work in my classes is to always do it student by student, and that's just my approach. You can decide how to do that on your own. But if I want to do it based on each student, an individual grade, I would click this here, and that will override the group setting for all the students in that group. I can also click on the group category, and I can also create a new group category. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of features in Canvas allow you to set up a group category. In this case, here within the assignments, you could also do that by clicking on the People tab and then on your Groups sub-tab. So it's really up to you. So that is to set up a group assignment. So this could be a final project, and as with any assignment in the class, you can choose what that is going to be. You can choose the subset of assignments and take it from there. Now, one thing to mention on here is keep in mind that if we're in the assignments page and we select a new group, that does not mean a group of students, it means an assignment group. So for me, I have projects, I have discussions, and then I have assignments, or these could maybe be titled exams. So it's just important to remember that, because a group here is a different meaning than the group, which is a cohort of students that we have under the People tab. So just important to remember that. Now, if I click on discussions, same thing, I could set up a group discussion. So I would click at the top here. And just as we saw in the assignments tab, if I click on group discussion, I have the same options here. I could choose a group category, and I could also create a new group category. So really up to you as far as how you want to use these features within Canvas. And so those are the main settings within Canvas as far as groups go. As I'll mention, there is a lot more than what I've covered here. So if you want to use more features in Canvas related to groups, if you want to learn more in-depth from tutorials on how to use groups in Canvas, simply go to the mini Canvas user pages, and I could show you how to get there if you have questions. You could also Google something like using groups in Canvas, and a page will come up, and typically that will be a tutorial, and it tells you everything about using groups, adding content, moving students, manually assigning students to groups, and so forth. So a lot there if you want to use groups within Canvas. All right, so let's move on then. If you want to use groups in Zoom, I won't cover a lot of this today because I've covered this in a previous tutorial. You can certainly check out my video called Zoom, Focus on Sharing Groups, Whiteboard, and Polls. This was a advanced Zoom focus that I created to cover these 4 useful features within Zoom. And if you're interested in groups in Zoom, go ahead and click on the video and then go to the time index found below the video in YouTube and go to the 1 hour, 25-minute mark, and that's when the feature on Zoom groups will start. Just as a reminder, I'll show you what I covered in the PowerPoint to give you a sense of this. So I covered the various ways to create breakout rooms when you're doing a live Zoom class. You can actually do some of this assignment ahead of time, depending on how you've set up your class. So you do have to think about your various settings in Zoom if you want to use that. A lot of opportunity to have large groups if you want to have them, and really Zoom is full featured, so you don't have to worry about running out of space for your students. And there is one setting in Zoom to look at under breakout rooms, so be sure to check that out. And then there's a lot of information online about tutorials of using Zoom groups and how to make them work for your specific class. So just be sure to check out that video if you're interested in any of these features in Zoom. And I go through all of the screen settings you're seeing here. Some of this is live in meetings. Some of this, again, is happening ahead of time if you're setting these up in your settings. So I won't cover a lot of that just because I've already done that in a previous video. So what I would say here as a review, if you want to do impromptu and more spontaneous work, I think groups work great in Zoom. So you could assign something like a discussion question to students, do the breakout rooms, have them work for 10-15 minutes, they come back to the big class, and the smaller groups could assign a leader and they could present that back to the larger class. If you want to do more sustained and collaborative work, I really do recommend using groups in Canvas. So this would be something like a final project for a class, a final presentation, and again, by going in and managing all the group settings, including the wiki pages and all the stuff you could set up, discussions if you want that, all the various shared documents like Google Docs, you can make sure that students stay on track and help deal with some of those issues that we'll talk about at the end of this video that unfortunately do arise when you set up group work in any class, whether face-to-face or distance education. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the functionality of the two main tools that we have, Zoom and Canvas, for setting up groups in your class. I think at this point we can move on to the idea of groups in pedagogy. So this refers to, beyond the practical aspects of setting up your groups in Zoom and Canvas, a focus on making group work effective in your DE class. As I say in the case of the face-to-face class, being sure that groups will be an effective learning and teaching approach is not a guarantee from the beginning. I find groups personally very challenging to work with, and I'll get into some of the reasons for that. But I'm not discouraging you from doing group work in the class. It's just a challenge in thinking about making sure that all the students stay on track, and then also managing the practical things like what happens when a student drops a class, or if a student is not as active as other students in the class. You have to think about those dynamics from the beginning. Maybe indicate some of that in your syllabus to protect all of your students and also to protect yourself as an instructor when it comes to assigning grades to group projects, particularly those that maybe have a lot of points allocated to them. So what I'll do now is share with you some excellent resources I found online. I have the URLs listed here. It's hard to kind of share those with you on a video because then you have to type these in. I may share these in the YouTube link of the video. As always, you can reach out to me and I'll give you those links and be happy to do that for you. Let's look at the first one. This really gets into the foundations of groups in a class. And this is an article I found in Inside Higher Ed. And by the way, at any point, if you're searching for information like I'm doing here, you could always go online and type in something, and with that phrase, you can often discover some excellent resources. So this is basically titled, Online Students Don't Have to Work Solo. This is talking about setting up effective group projects and discussing some of the unique challenges and logistics of those. As you see here, they're discussing challenges with group projects, the fact that students sometimes are not good at being self-paced, are not good at working collaboratively. This particular instructor for this class set up this group page, and I thought this was kind of effective. This is for a final project, and this tells the students everything they have to do to develop that project. So this might be a good opportunity to take some of this information and incorporate it in your class as well. This is a conversation about should you assign groups or let them form organically. So this is one of these things where I would say it's really up to you to decide on the dynamic of the class, on the individual student personalities, and try to figure out what's going to work best for you. So definitely read this article over. For all of these resources, I'm just going to cover the highlights and then you can take them and use them as you like. And this is a conversation about grading as a whole or individually, and there's also a tip here. So as I said earlier, I think you have to think about the scenario of you have a group of 4 students working together and only 2 of the 4 students are active. I don't personally think it's fair to assign the same grade to all 4 students if only 2 students did the work. And I was participating in a DE conference recently, and one of the complaints that came up in talking about online group work was this exact scenario where you have only half or a third of a given group with active students. It's really not fair to the rest of the students then if you're assigning them all the same grade. So it's definitely something to think about in terms of the group work in your class. So that's a good article on the foundations of groups. As far as effective strategies for groups, I wanted to share this with you as well. I thought there were some really good tips to be had here. And this is from learningandteachinghub.com. And specifically this area here, this little chart, I think you should focus on. And this is strategies for effective online group work. Ensuring students have a clear purpose, and I think this is very important to set up in your syllabus ahead of time before the class starts. Establishing the learning objectives, make the assessment criteria explicit. I didn't go into this in Canvas, but if you wanted to, you could set up a group rubric that was very specific to letting students know what they had to do as individuals within that group, whether it's a group project or group conversation or group research assignment of some sort, letting them know through the rubric about how they're going to be graded. That might help with the motivation in terms of getting all students within a group to participate. Establish tasks for individual members that will add up to the complete assignment. Consider assigning roles such as project managers. So that's a good opportunity to go back to Canvas then and setting up that group leader. Think about if you want to assign that on your own, you decide who the group leader is, or you do it more randomly. Ensure the group size is appropriate enough to allow full participation of all members. So fortunately, you can control that both within Zoom and Canvas in terms of defining the number of students, and again, whether you want it to be random or you want to decide. And both Canvas and Zoom will allow you to either randomize the whole process or define it from the get-go. So the power is up to you as the faculty member. Allow adequate time for preparation and communication. Again, use Canvas LMS to assign due dates, keep students on task. Very important to do that. Don't allow students to wait until the last minute. What I like to do with group projects or individual projects that are a culmination, like an art portfolio or something like this, is to have check-in points. Maybe after, if you have an 11-week class, after week 3, the proposal is due. Week 5, a check-in is due. Week 7, another check-in, and week 10 is maybe the final presentation if you have that. Don't allow students to rush and wait until the last minute because that will not be effective collaboration. In the corporate world, if you have collaboration, you never want to have things happen at the very last minute before a project is due. And then lastly, as an instructor, facilitate and be involved in the group activities. This is really important. Again, you can trust your students to do some work independently, but definitely check in and make sure they're doing what they need to do. I didn't mention this in Canvas, but you can use the full-fledged Canvas Analytics available in a couple places in Canvas, certainly under the People tab. In this way, you could see if members of a group individually are doing their part based upon their participation time that they're logging on to Canvas. You can see all of that in Canvas Analytics. If you have questions about that, reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you out with it. And then below on this page, there are examples here of how to use online group work. So I think that could be also very effective for you to check out. Again, I'm just providing these because I found them useful in my own work in terms of thinking about the pedagogical foundations of groups. Now, this next set of items is from a very good blog that it looks like her name is Debbie Morrison created. So I wanted to show you these as well. Very in-depth focus on doing effective collaboration in online courses. So the first article here is part of a three-part series, and this is on 5 elements that promote learner collaboration and group work in online courses. What I like about this is there is some pedagogical theory behind it for you to read, and this discusses the 5 elements needed for effective group work. So these include social presence, the presence of a leader, again, an opportunity to really think about effective pedagogy as it results from the foundations of the groups that you establish either through Canvas, Zoom, and certainly through those foundations that you state in your syllabus. If you're doing a big group project or big group work in your class, I recommend you have a specific subheading in your syllabus that talks about all the dynamics of the group, the leaders, the grading, the expectations on timeline, and all that kind of nitty-gritty stuff. You should have clear purpose and clear instructions. Can't emphasize that enough. Focus on skill development for working in a team. And I think it's very important to say, what are the parameters of how the group project or group work will be developed in the class? What happens if there's a dispute? So addressing student behavior, if it's going to be a group discussion of a sensitive topic as something that might develop in a social science class, you really do need to think about that from the beginning. And then seamless technology. So think about the technology that you plan to use, whether it's Zoom or Canvas. Think about using those features in your group work throughout the class. And this is just a reminder, as I said earlier, do think about groups and grading. Set up your priorities or foundations from the beginning and decide if you're grading students as a group or deciding if you'd rather grade them as individual participants within a group. And once you've established that, I think it's going to be a lot easier going forward. You don't want to wait till the end of the class to decide on the parameters of your groups, how they're going to develop a project, a discussion, an assignment, and you certainly don't want to decide on the grading of the group assignment later in the quarter. Have that set up day one within your syllabus. The last one I'll share here is on groups and facilitation. This is from that same blog, really excellent source. I'm so happy to see that resources like this are available even on blog pages, which can be excellent. So this is from that same author, Debbie Morrison, and it talks about strategies of facilitation within the group. And these are, again, set up as 5 vital skills that are available for group work in the class. Creating a social and active learning community. For me, this is the number one reason for using groups in a class. It's active learning. It's student-to-student interaction that we know is so key and important with accreditation, with the parameters established by the CVC OEI statewide group through the Chancellor's Office for Community Colleges. So really important to use group work in establishing more collaborative and interactive work between students and also between students and the faculty member. Group work allows us to demonstrate leadership skills in a class. It allows for the development of communication skills. Certainly, working in groups is an opportunity to think about what happens when conflict arises and how to manage conflict, both for instructors in the class and for students who are learning skills, including skills of becoming more mature in terms of working with others in a classroom or even a work setting. And then thinking about opportunities to use group work to monitor students' progress and to give them feedback. So there's a lot within groups that really allows us to cover things that are certainly important within DE education that is always reminded to us by accrediting commissions and also certainly by groups like the CVC OEI and in other contexts like DE conferences that we might attend. One of the things that always comes up in those conversations about DE education is how to make things more interactive. And I really feel like groups could be a great opportunity to make your class much more interactive than it maybe has been in the past. So we'll close out here with just some key tips or summary points about groups that I would offer to you today. The first is to use the Canvas Zoom tools that will provide the best groups experience for your class. So like with everything else that I've mentioned in Canvas and Zoom, use only the features that make the most sense for you in the class. So I think the important thing is to first establish what you want to happen with groups and then go back in and decide Zoom, Canvas, both, and then which features within both of those technologies will make the most sense for your group assignments. Second is to set the group ground rules from the beginning of the class and clearly detail these in the class syllabus. By having these established from the beginning, You're really telling your students what you expect in terms of their grades, in terms of the etiquette that might have to take place within the group assignments and so forth. Third is to establish the purpose of group work. And I would say this personally, don't use groups if you're just feigning collaboration. So what I mean by that is group work should be meaningful. And group work is super challenging. I can tell you from my own experiences in face-to-face classes and DE classes. So if I'm assigning group work, I'm not doing it just because I want to say, let's quote, collaborate when the students are not really authentically collaborating. So assign group work if you choose to do so, but make it authentic. Don't make it collaborative just for the sake of collaboration. Make sure it's meaningful. Make sure it relates to the types of assignments you're doing in your class. Consider from the beginning the scenario in which a student drops your class or in which a student does not participate equally with other classmates. I won't go over this again. I talked about it earlier, but it's happened to me in contexts where a student will come to office hours and say, hey, this particular student in my group, they're not returning my calls or emails, and I don't know how to get them involved. That's an opportunity for you to intervene because it's not fair to the other students if you allow one student to get away with not doing work in a group assignment of some sort, and then all of the students get the same grade. So it's really important to deal with this scenario. In my opinion, it's the number one scenario that I've noted in my years of teaching in terms of assigning group work. Based on the previous scenario, as I said before, be sure to make groups grading equitable for all students. You decide from the beginning if you're assigning a grade to all students within the group or if you want to grade students individually within each group. It's up to you. And then lastly, very important here, use groups as a means of developing necessary student skills of collaboration in your class. I think it's great to use the groups tools in Canvas and Zoom because it really does teach students a super important foundation, irregardless of the discipline that we're teaching in, and that is how to work better with other people in a group setting. It's certainly something they're going to need in their four-year education, going on to graduate school, and certainly in all the various workforce occupations out there in the future. So there's a lot to think about in terms of groups, and again, I encourage you to use groups as a creative opportunity to extend the learning in your class to make the learning more meaningful, authentic, and interactive for you and your students. As always, if questions come up about groups, please reach out to me. I'd be very happy to go over any of those issues you might have about groups. So just reach out using my email here, and I hope to see you back for future trainings here on Canvas, Zoom, and other features of distance education here at Lake Tahoe Community College.